opened, and the Archbishop of Washington left the Baroness's parlor, his audience concluded. He walked slowly, his black and scarlet robes swaying majestically as he moved through the crowd of mourners. The usher nodded to Caroline, and she leaned over to help Mrs. McKinley rise. Ida McKinley was only 53, but her prematurely gray hair and the cane she used to compensate for a nerve-damaged leg made her seem older. The Baroness was dressed in full mourning, her black silk gown spread artfully across a bench and her face covered with a transparent black veil. She nodded in greeting. "Avete la nostre più sentite condoglianze," Caroline said with a deep curtsy as she entered. The Baroness murmured a response, and Caroline provided the translation for Mrs. McKinley. "Lady Vitozzi appreciates your sympathy. All the people of the city have been so kind since the terrible news arrived last night." Mrs. McKinley nodded and took a seat. "Tell her that if there is anything our nation can do to assist during Italy's time of need, she need only ask." Caroline translated as the First Lady continued to offer perfectly appropriate generalities about the mysteries of God's ways and praise for the fallen King Umberto. All was proceeding smoothly, something that could never be taken for granted with Mrs. McKinley. Then the First Lady began recounting the one time she had visited Italy during a grand tour of Europe several years earlier. "We enjoyed Rome, especially the ancient ruins and the opera house. Sicily, on the other hand, was terrible. No electricity, leaky roofs, and the only plumbing dated all the way back to the Renaissance. It was mind-boggling." Caroline froze, praying the Baroness truly didn't understand English, for the ambassador's family came from Sicily. Behind her veil, the Baroness swiveled to look at Caroline, her face perfectly blank as she awaited the translation. Caroline couldn't tell an outright lie, but neither could she translate what Mrs. McKinley had just said. Both women looked at her with expectation, and Caroline chose her words carefully. "Mrs. McKinley admired the architecture of Italy," she said in Italian. "How clever the Italians are to have had modern conveniences like plumbing all the way back to the Renaissance. It was truly astounding." The Baroness smiled and nodded, and the remaining few minutes proceeded without incident. Beneath her skirts, Caroline gently tapped Mrs. McKinley's foot, signaling it was time to rise and end the call. "That went well, didn't it?" Mrs. McKinley pronounced once they were aboard the carriage and heading back to the White House. She didn't wait for a reply before continuing her monologue. "Terrible tragedy about the king, simply terrible. Nothing like that would ever happen to Major, of course." Mrs. McKinley always referred to her husband as the Major, for they had met shortly after the Civil War, when Major William McKinley was still in uniform. Over the years, he'd served as a congressman, a governor, and now the president, but his wife still called him the Major. Caroline thought it rather charming. "The Major is too popular to ever arouse that sort of ire," Mrs. McKinley continued. "Everyone likes him." "While it's true that everyone likes him, that doesn't mean they will vote for him," Caroline said. She was veering into dangerous waters, but it had to be done. The presidential election was in 4 months, and despite William McKinley's popularity, nothing could be taken for granted. He had been too busy with the duties of his office to campaign, and his wife never offered to help. She was the least popular First Lady in history, and Caroline had been hired to help correct that image. Working for Mrs. McKinley was like walking a tightrope. At any moment, it could snap, but so far, Caroline had been able to support the infamously difficult First Lady without allowing Ida to trample her. When in public, Caroline was the epitome of deferential respect, but in private, their relationship shifted. They bickered, gossiped, laughed, and fought. The First Lady even insisted